Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge, a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services focusing on the Port of Anchorage and the major commercial participants in the Cook Inlet region, providing customers with marine services specifically tailored to their needs.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on the 20th of May here. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information for your community and village by going to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. Call the weather info line at 800-472-0391 and find us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube during the day. Around 3:45 or so on YouTube, if you search for AKwx or Alaska Weather, you'll be able to find a kind of a condensed version of what we're talking about here, of course, with the surface charts you like to see, and you'll get a sneak peek at what we're going to talk about tonight on Alaska Weather. First off, let's talk about the hazardous weather situation. Everything that you see here in red, of course, is red flag warnings, with one exception. We have a flood watch for the Porcupine River to about the Canadian border, of course, with a lot of runoff going on there. We're watching for that area around Fort Yukon and upstream along the Porcupine. So flood watch there could lean over toward a flood warning if conditions warrant and worsen there. But for everywhere else south of that, conditions are just dry. There's enough wind and low humidity that any little spark could present an extraordinary fire danger there. So be extra careful and fire-wise if you're in any of the communities in the red flag warning there, from the Alaska Range to Healy to the Deltana and Tanana Flats region, Eagle, Northway, all around Fairbanks, of course, and in the Copper River Basin. Northward, we're still looking at a flood warning along the Dalton Highway from where you've been seeing a lot of the pictures all the way up to Dead Horse. So that continues as well, at least until Friday, and conditions probably will remain pretty murky and muddy in those areas for the foreseeable future, as above average temperatures will continue. Here's a look at the breakup map. As of noon today, you can see the flood watch there along the Porcupine there from Fort Yukon all the way to the Alcan border. Otherwise, things are looking pretty good. Even along the north slope, conditions are showing at least some open to mostly open conditions there along some of the main stem rivers and also into the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, everywhere else along the Yukon. And the Kuskokwim looking pretty good there. You can see mostly open conditions there as you get all the way from areas out toward Imanik and the western coast. So conditions are rapidly improving for most of the regions. We're still watching the north slope in areas along the Porcupine at this time. And in the meantime, we're also shifting the focus over toward fire danger. And without a whole lot of rain making its way eastward into the central or especially the eastern interior, at least into the weekend, it looks like pretty high fire danger exists all the way, in fact, into northern parts of southeast. That, with thunderstorms developing across central and southern parts of southeast over the last couple of days, that is kind of worrisome there. A very short window normally for fire danger in southeast is certainly sitting right on top of us right now. But more threatening is the extreme fire danger, or the higher, very high to extreme fire danger that we see across the central interior and the Alaska Range, and points even on the western side of the slope. So again, be extra careful with fire in your community. Here's a look at the Bering Sea, and keep an eye on this feature here south of the Kamchatka Peninsula. This is now the remnants of what was once Typhoon Dolphin. Kind of a funny name, but as that continues to track north and east, this will become a stronger system across the north and western Bering Sea. The strongest winds for the central and western Aleutians will probably start up as we head into tomorrow. Already, gale force and storm force winds are expected as we head into tomorrow, and those will probably strengthen a little bit more as we head out into the western Bering Sea. This is traveling pretty quickly, so as we head into tomorrow, we'll see the circulation start to show up in the maps very close to the Aleutians, then eventually make its way into the western Bering as we head through the weekend. It'll kind of make a loop back on itself and then travel back into the southern Bering as we go ahead into later on in the weekend. Right now, no major impacts expected for the mainland or the Alaska Peninsula. This is mainly going to stir up the winds and bring a lot more cloud cover to the Bering, but a predominant southerly flow continues to keep things pretty mild across most of the west coast and the Aleutians at this point. And again, with a ridge of high pressure across our region, things really aren't going to change much for most places in Alaska. Now here's a visible satellite picture. You can see the stratus and the fog across the Gulf, a huge ridge of high pressure sitting across the Gulf right now. And look at southeast, sitting pretty in the clear. Wow, what a day for you. Again, a very warm one as well, as you'll see in the temperatures in just a few minutes. For the central and eastern interior, a lot of sunshine here. Same goes for many areas on the north slope. A little more cloud cover that's not showing up in the satellite picture. A low just south of Unalaska, Dutch Harbor. We're back in that southerly flow for Kodiak and Southwest. And there's the clouds preceding what is once Typhoon Dolphin there. That'll become an extratropical system. As we look out across the east, again, you can see a lot of stratus, just kind of keeping things nice and quiet across the Gulf. Pretty light winds in most areas there, but a gusty situation up and down the west coast today. Gusts there in the 30 and 40 mile an hour range for many along southwestern Alaska and into parts of the Norton Sound region. A lot more cloud cover that way. Not so much for the central and eastern interior, and all the bubbly clouds you see across the Yukon and British Columbia, a lot of that was thunderstorm activity today, and you can see that wrapping around high pressure across the western parts of Canada. There's our high pressure system across the Gulf at 1,026 millibars, and low pressure just south of St. Lawrence Island at 966 millibars, compared to a much weaker circulation south of the Aleutians there. You can see that pretty clearly in the satellite picture as we saw, and some light rain along with the winds there across south and western Alaska. High pressure locking in a little bit of fog and stratus across the Arctic coast, and once again here's the next wave of clouds coming in with the weather system from the North Pacific. That is primarily going to boost temperatures and winds across the central and western chain as we head into tomorrow. Once again, gales and storm force winds expected there. As that warm air lifts northward, we'll see a few showers across the west, across Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula, and we can't rule out a thunderstorm in the vicinity of southeastern Alaska, especially closer to the Misty Fjords region and areas closer to the higher terrain. But by and large, it looks like most areas in southeast tonight are going to have a pretty nice and quiet night as high pressure is large and in charge across the Gulf. We're going to see fog and stratus linger, especially close to the coast. A day much like you had today. Looks like it'll be in the offing for tomorrow. And once again, we'll watch for a few of those showers and storms close to places like Hyder and maybe across some of these southern waterways there if things just develop just right. But most of that's going to be across the mainland of Canada and in the western provinces there. High pressure still sitting across the north and eastern parts of the Yukon, and that's going to help keep central and eastern sections of the interior pretty dry and probably mostly cloud-free. Across the west, showers and a few areas of light rain moving up the extreme west across the Noatak, Kobuk valleys and the Chukchi Seacoast. Cold enough for snow across into Siberia, and here comes what's left of Dolphin. As the warmer air surges northward, the winds are going to tighten up there, so storm force winds again across many areas out in the west. As we get into Friday, the storm will now be in the south and western parts of the Bering down to 964 millibars. The occlusion moving quickly away from the center, moving north and east, heading for Dutch Harbor and Unalaska and Nikolsky. And you'll see a wave of rainfall moving over the Alaska Peninsula. Some showers starting to work into the Gulf, but really high pressure doesn't move much at all. In fact, it's staying put. Because of that, many in south central, many in the interior are going to stay dry and see plenty of sunshine. High pressure across the north slope might allow a little bit of precipitation in under it, but it's not going to last much. But it is warm, and that does mean you're likely to see rainfall. It might mix in with a little bit of snowfall, but most likely things are going to be pretty warm across the north slope and across the lower and middle Yukon Valley. And clouds start to move eastward a little bit more. Fairbanks might become partly sunny. Really, it looks pretty dry, pretty sunny as we head into the end of the week. Now look at these temperatures for southeast today, 50s and 60s. That's what sunshine will do to the panhandle when you don't have a whole lot of cloud cover in the region. Beautiful day. Places like Haines and Skagway. Sitka was up to 57 by mid-afternoon. 60s for southern parts of southeast. Probably got a little bit warmer after we made the maps. Mid-50s around most of Prince William Sound. Valdez up to 55, about what we were seeing in Anchorage here by late afternoon. 57 around Talkeetna. 69 as you get up toward Golkana. 76 for Northway, and above the 80-degree mark again in Eagle. Mid-70s for the Tanana Valley around Fairbanks. 69 degrees as you get up toward Tanana itself. 75 in Fort Yukon. Northward, the North Slope in the 30s and 40s. 61 for Anaktuvuk Pass. The Chukchi Seacoast in the 30s and 40s. Kotzebue was looking at 50 degrees. 47 in Kivalina. 42 for Nome. Norton Sound temps in the 40s and 50s today. McGrath up to 61. Grayling showing 50 degrees. 49 in Bethel and 37 in St. Lawrence Island. A nice day in the Bristol Bay region as well. 40s and 50s there. King Salmon showing 41. Lake Iliamna at 46 degrees. Kodiak Island also in the 40s and 50s by late afternoon. 40s and maybe mid-50s there for a good chunk of the Alaska Peninsula, including Sand Point, right on that 50-degree mark. 49 around False Pass and Cold Bay. 46 for Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. Low 40s for the Pribilovs, and lower to mid-40s for the central and western chain. Now, if you are an aviator, a mariner, and you're out there across the western Bering, you're going to want to watch the weather here with the next couple slides for the west, because remember, that storm system that's moving northward is going to start to change the weather. In fact, if you're a birder, if you haven't made plans to head out to the Pribilovs, you might want to check that out as well. Probably going to stir up some interesting creatures headed that way with that new storm. Now, across the central and western parts of Alaska, we're going to keep mild weather going thanks to that strong southerly flow. You can see readings back in the 30s and 40s tonight, with North Slope temperatures in the 30s and 40s as well. 32 around Barrow, let's say about 44 in Nome, mid to upper 40s for southwest Alaska. Dutch Harbor looking at about 43 and closing in on 50 degrees for many parts of southeastern Alaska. South central in the lower 40s, Kodiak 45, a high of 52 tomorrow. Look at the interior, upper 70s to about 80 degrees. Eagles probably going over that again to about 83 tomorrow. 40s and 50s for the North Slope, 42 in Nome. Southwest and Bristol Bay in the lower 50s along the coast, even warmer for the interior. McGrath showing 61. The peninsula and the chain probably a little bit milder with more clouds and a better chance of rain and stronger winds out in the west. 42 for the Pribilovs and 50s and 60s for many in southeast. A few select locations where the sunshine and light winds sit on top of you all day. You might see temperatures even in the mid-60s, probably even warmer. Now, flying weather. As far as flying weather goes in southeast, most areas will probably be VFR tomorrow, but that marine stratus isn't going to be that far off from the coast. Watch for that to sneak into the nooks and crannies there around your favorite spots, especially around the Dixon entrance. So if that's closer to where you are and you saw similar conditions today, it's probably not going to be a whole lot different. But many from the central and northern parts all the way up toward the Lynn Canal should have severe clear tomorrow. It looks like a gorgeous day once again, but watch out for a few of those storm clouds to pop up in the late afternoon for areas around the Misty Fjords. Now, westward, MVFR conditions up and down the west coast. Look for IFR conditions across the western slopes of the Brooks Range, as well as areas along the south-facing slopes of the Seward Peninsula out toward Nome and northern sections of Norton Sound, also around Cape Newenham and the Kilbuck Mountains and southern sections of Kodiak Island and the western part of the Gulf, and of course out across the western Bering and the western chain as the remnants of dolphin are moving northward. Past conditions, though, mostly look pretty good. VFR conditions all the way around the Brooks Range, Anaktuvuk, and Adigan Pass, of course, at VFR. The Alaska Range looks pretty nice tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass VFR there. Rainy Pass and Windy Pass, we're going to call visual flight rule all day long. Isabel Pass and Mentasta Pass look pretty nice at VFR conditions. Tanita Pass also looking at VFR, as well as Portage Pass. Looks pretty good in Prince William Sound through most of the day. And Chilkoot and White Pass, as we just saw, conditions look pretty nice in the northern parts of southeastern Alaska. Now, with a southerly flow in the jet stream position just like it is, we've got a lot of warm air across the interior, across the eastern Gulf. The freezing levels as high as 6,000 to 8,000 feet across south central. Even the North Slope, you can see that surface freezing line just hugging the North Slope coastline around the Beaufort Seacoast and then dropping southward, but only as it's west of the Bering Strait. You can also see that forcing of that warm air lifting northward again as the next weather system's lifting into the Bering. With that, icing potential is pretty high up there. Look for 8 to about 10,000 foot levels, light to isolated moderate, mainly across the north and western coastline, also across the middle Yukon Valley down to the western slopes of the Alaska Range, and then a pocket of moisture still lingering. This is all kind of leftovers from the last system that worked through, so this is kind of falling apart. Meanwhile, we're setting up a new area to watch out across the western Bering. That's also going to be pretty high up there, though, light to isolated moderate above 8,000. Our upper level jet stream pattern there, that super high wave of wind that steers all of the surface weather, shows high pressure locked in across the north and western provinces of Canada and into the interior. That's taking any weather that's coming our way, dropping it south along the trough, and then zipping it northward and bringing all of that heat back into the interior, keeping things pretty stable here. However, this faster ribbon of air there across the North Pacific is what's driving that new surface system, that the leftovers of the tropical typhoon Dolphin heading into the Bering Sea. So we'll see what kind of disruptions this makes over the longer term of the week to maybe 2 weeks as that system tries to break things up and change it around just a little bit. At 9,000 feet, high pressure sitting right across the western Yukon. You can see light winds wrapping around on the south and north side of that. Low pressure sitting across the Dixon entrance has light winds wrapping into that. So pretty nice conditions there across southeast. But here come the stronger winds for the central and western chain. 50, 60 knot winds there coming in at 9,000 feet. Take a look at 3,000 feet. And you'll notice those winds are still running around 50 to 60 knots. So storm force and gale force winds there for the central and western chain, not to mention turbulence issues with that speed. And we've got lighter winds across the interior, only 5 to 15 knots. A little bit stronger across the north slope, 20 to 25 knots, and stronger winds coming in right across the Chukchi coast of eastern Siberia, right around 50 knots there. So we're going to watch for some turbulence below 9,000 feet, mainly in the north, maybe just grazing Point Hope and Point Lay. And then as you get out toward the central and western chain below 9,000 feet, there's certainly an opportunity for some occasional to widespread moderate and maybe even some isolated severe. So watch for that if you're flying around Adak and Atkin points west tomorrow. This will gradually shift north and maybe a little bit further east as we head into Friday and Saturday, but kind of spread out and probably weaken in its intensity. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with your marine weather and a look at the sea ice edge here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
The following program is brought to you by the Ocean Alaska Science and Learning Center, a partnership dedicated to understanding and preserving the marine ecosystem connecting Alaska's national parks through research and education. The pristine wilderness of Kenai Fjords National Park is becoming increasingly popular as a destination for kayak campers. As visitor use increases, so does the interaction and potential for conflict between humans and wildlife. Black bears are abundant along the park's coastline, and park managers are interested in preventing negative interactions and protecting both bears and park visitors. A team of researchers is investigating how bears react to human presence in Kenai Fjords National Park. Steve Partridge, biologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, is one of the principal investigators in this study.
I think the original focus of it was to try to determine how people's activities in the fjords here affect bear behavior, and especially in places like these meadows that are really important, especially early on for bears. Typically they're losing weight right now as before the berries come out, so anything they can get in the way of green vegetation is good for them. So I think what we wanted to initially do is look at how people moving around in the meadows or approaching on kayaks or powerboats affected these bears in the meadows. And so what we've done is found bears in these meadows, and depending on where the bears were, we might approach them on a powerboat, or we might try to get in on a kayak. But what we're doing is we're with laser rangefinders, we're trying to figure out when the bear notices the person's approach first, and so that would be a distance that we definitely want. And then the next distance we would want, at what point does the bear change its behavior from what it was doing previously, which is generally foraging, to maybe just staring at us now and not eating anymore. And then the probably most important one is, at what point does the bear decide now it wants to leave? It's uncomfortable, people are too close.
Researchers patrolled areas known to be frequented by black bears in early spring. When they sighted a bear, they began a systematic approach, recording the bear's behavior as they drew nearer and nearer.
Bear on the right's watching us too. 205. Yeah.
I'm not sure the exact numbers, but I want to say probably what we'd call the flushing distance, probably averaged right around 100 meters, which I think is fairly consistent.
Since black bears are so abundant in Kenai Fjords, park managers have made efforts to limit human and bear interactions by providing food storage lockers or lines for hanging food on the most popular beaches, and requiring bear-resistant food containers at other locations. Containers can be checked out at the park headquarters in Seward free of charge.
I don't think that this park has had any history of a few, I think, tent destruction cases, but nothing serious where any kind of, injury was involved, I don't believe. So I don't know, it wasn't a safety issue, I think. It's maybe just trying to look and see if we could, you know, as this part of the bay becomes more popular, try to get in ahead of the curve and putting together some really good guidelines for kayakers to try to minimize any disturbance that people may have in these meadows.
The Nuka Bay region, where Partridge's team was working, is the more seldom visited part of Kenai Fjords National Park. It also contains more extensive meadow habitat than the more steep-sided fjords elsewhere in the park.
And these places provide some of the only opportunities they have, or the earliest opportunities they have to get grass. And a lot of these places that are snow-free, you know, at least back to a little ways. So there's always a little vegetation on the periphery that they can get. So it's definitely important in early season, and just good forage for them, I think. So.
Another part of the study involved monitoring the most productive meadows with time-lapse video cameras for several days with no humans present, then establishing a camp in the meadow to see if the bear's foraging behavior was affected. This data has not been fully analyzed yet. In general, though, Partridge was surprised at how oblivious some bears can be to human presence.
Or there's a misconception about how much bears are paying attention to their surroundings. I think a lot of people think they're really tuned into everything and they can, you know, they see at a mile or smell you at a mile. But I think a lot of times, since they're not typically worried about predators, they kind of, you know, get in their own little world like the absent-minded professor. And boy, I've surprised a lot of bears, you know, and as probably a lot of other people have, without trying it at all. So that was surprising. That I think it's, you know, I think sometimes they're not paying as much attention as you think they should be. You know, you learn out here for sure how difficult it is to try to tease these things out, and I think probably, if nothing else, I think we'll get great data on the approaches. I think we can provide Kenai Fjords with some good information there, and I think a lot of people, if you just tell them that, you know, hey, here's these meadows and there's going to be a lot of bears in there and it's a good area for them to feed, that they'll probably avoid those areas because they don't want to disturb the animals, and a lot of times they just need the information. And so hopefully we'll be able to provide a lot of good basic information on how these bears are using these meadows.
In the end, park managers hope to use the information that Partridge and his co-investigators are gathering to minimize the potential for negative or harmful interactions between bears and park visitors, while maximizing the opportunities for bears to thrive and people to enjoy the wilderness of Kenai Fjords National Park.
I think, you know, we still have a really good chance up here to preserve wild populations of bears, and there's a lot of areas I think that there's really good conservation efforts. So for a bear biologist, this is a dream come true, you know. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff to do up here. So.
Time for a quick check of the ice edge, and you can see that a lot of the ice has dissipated quickly, and with a stronger southerly flow across the northern Bering Sea, a lot of this is going to change in the coming days. So if your livelihood and existence is dependent on where that ice is, be sure to check out weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. We'd love to get your reports, and we'd love to help get your information to everybody else. So again, check that out anytime, and be safe out there as conditions will be changing. For Thursday in southeast, look for a dominant westerly and northwesterly flow along the outer coast, right around 20 to 25 knots, and light southerly winds for the central and northern parts of the inner waterways. More of a northwesterly flow through Clarence Strait, around 20 knots on Thursday. A little bit of a change on Friday, mainly diminishing winds in the northern outer coast. Light southerlies in the Lynn Canal up to 15 knots, and 10 to 20 knots there for the north and west, coming through areas around Stevens Passage and into Clarence Strait, with about 2 to 4 foot seas there for Friday. For south central, a variable and light flow inside of Prince William Sound, looking at southeasterlies cutting across the Barren Islands, 15 to 20 knots there. Light northeasterly winds inside of Shelikof Strait, and an onshore flow from the south and east to Kodiak Island, 20 knots with an 8-foot sea. Going into Friday, you'll notice winds a little bit more from the east, cutting across the western Barrens at 20 knots with a 7-foot sea. Light and variable winds for the northern parts of the Gulf, even inside of Prince William Sound, up to 15 knots though, and a southwesterly flow on the outside. Southeasterly still coming into Kodiak Island around 25 knots, with northeasterly winds picking up inside of Shelikof Strait, and southwesterlies should be light coming up Cook Inlet around 10 knots with a 3-foot sea. Across the Alaska Peninsula, light and variable winds, though, with an 8-foot sea south of Sand Point and King Cove. Look for southeasterlies inside of Bristol Bay to remain light, a little bit stronger on the south side of the Alaska Peninsula. By Friday, the winds are picking up and responding to the stronger low pressure system out in your west. Look for 20 to 25 knot winds, 4 to 5 foot seas in the Bering, and 6 to 8 foot seas on Friday in the North Pacific coast. As we get into Thursday, you can see some big changes out in the west. Again, we're talking about storm force winds out in the west with gales in many other locations. 15 to 20 knots across the eastern chain, but higher gusts and stronger winds, as well as higher seas there, with 18 to 19 foot seas there in the west from Kiska all the way out toward Attu on Thursday. For Friday, south and westerly winds showing at 40 to 45 knots. Look for 20 to 35 knot winds around Unalaska and Nikolsky with 9 to 12 foot seas there. 15 to 16 foot seas for the central chain, as high as 17 foot seas there south of Atka and Adak, and then as you get to the west, 21 to 26 foot seas heading out from Kiska to Attu. Again, still looking at 40 to 45 knot winds. You'll see those southwesterlies staying dominant there on Thursday, 20 to 25 knots for most areas on the west coast. From Hooper Bay southward, those winds fall off to about 10 to 15 knots, and then by Friday, stronger change there, especially for the western Bering. Again, if you're west of the Pribilofs, west of St. Matthew, your winds are going to be a lot higher. 35 to 40 knot winds there with 13 to 20 foot seas there west of the Pribilofs, northward towards St. Matthew. The western coast, again, not really looking at major impacts, so a little bit of breeze, a little more cloud cover. Most of the strong winds are going to be well off to your west. Look for a predominant southeasterly flow, 25 to 30 knots on Friday. For the north slope, southerlies coming up across the Bering Strait, 25 to 35 knots. Easterlies for the Beaufort Seacoast, 20 to 30 knots over the ice. A little bit of a change there for Friday, a west to northwesterly flow around 15 knots. Southerlies continue across the Chukchi Seacoast and outside of Kotzebue Sound, 25 to 30 knots for you. Recapping tonight's weather, looks fairly nice across southeast tonight. Showers across the west coast. Looks like a southerly flow will continue across the west coast for the coming days. Here comes warmer air into the Bering Sea with the remnants of tropical storm, or the typhoon, I should say, Dolphin. It does not have any major impacts for most of the mainland, but for the central and western chain, we expect stronger winds, some of those as high as storm force as we head into tomorrow. Those marine warnings are already up. An isolated storm can't be ruled out of southern parts of southeast tomorrow, but the major story in the map will be out in the Bering as we head into the weekend. Thanks for watching Alaska.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.